You're hanging out in the House of Sunny podcast, where it's always sunny, mostly because of your host, comedian and YouTuber, Sunny Lohman. Want to know what Sunny and her friends are thinking about this week? Well, here she is, Sunny Lohman.
All right, then. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the House of Sunny podcast. I'm here with Doug from The Rational Capitalist. How's it going, Doug?
Good. How are you, Sunny?
Good. I thought I had coronavirus, and I did get tested. I don't know if I said that last week. Did I mention that on the podcast last week? And it was negative, but it turns out I have pneumonia.
Ooh. Oh, that's good.
So that explains the shortness of breath.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah,
it's
thanks.
just pneumonia.
It's just pneumonia.
Jeez. Are you all right?
Yeah, I'm, whatever. I'm never all right. But I have to say, I'm really glad though that I'm diagnosed because it's walking pneumonia, which means I guess that you have a mild form of it. So you're up and around, which I'm barely up and around because if I walk across the room, I'm short of breath.
You have barely walking pneumonia.
But I'm sitting in a chair and I'm okay. It's not like I'm like in bed sick and really barely breathing and stuff. So it's walking pneumonia. But if I were to get coronavirus with that would be a serious comorbidity.
Shit, yeah.
And I'm also severely anemic right now, which is, it turns out, according to these new theories of what coronavirus does in the body, that's actually a big danger. So I'm glad to be diagnosed because now I'm on a Z-Pack and hopefully within a week I won't have pneumonia anymore. So.
Yeah, one thing at a time.
One thing at a time. It's an onion.
And of course, you can get COVID.
Then I'm allowed. Right. No, never. I think that I really need to not get that. I'm trying really hard not to get it. That's my conclusion. I have so many health problems that I just think that would be the end. I really do. I mean, it's sort of morbid to say that, but.
So you're not gonna go on your normal walking tour, Skid Row,
toilets or
a Skid Row in
I'm not gonna go feed the homeless like I usually do.
Yeah, just take a break from that for a week.
Take a break from feeding the homeless and sharing needles with them.
Volunteering in the ICU.
Right. But anyway, there's some breaking news. In the midst of this horrible virus that we have some incredible life-saving information. Breaking news, Harry and Meghan have launched their new charity.
Stop.
Now it's time for the House of Sunny's Royal Watch.
Can you imagine in all of this, they've made this big announcement that, we are launching our new foundation. I mean, it's like not related to coronavirus, but...
That's only like the second or third largest story in the world then. Normally that would be the number one story.
Harry and Meghan to the rescue. But the funny part about it is, so it's called Archewell instead of the Sussex Royal, instead of the snotty Sussex Royal brand. It's called...
You got to do the drop too, by the way. Remember.
I will do the drop, yeah. Okay. It's called Archewell, and it's basically the same thing. It's Goop. It's royal goop, is what it is. If you know what Goop is, it's Gwyneth Paltrow's sort of lifestyle thing.
Oh, where you can smell her vagina.
You get the vagina candle. Will Meghan go that far? I don't know. Anything for publicity. And you know what these gold digging... speaking of that, the really funny thing is, if you went to archewellfoundation.org this week, it got redirected to Kanye West's gold digger video on YouTube.
Nice.
Yeah. So that was a funny thing. Everybody knows it. And you remember the old gold digger was Fergie, who was married to Prince Andrew, the Queen's son, Prince Andrew.
I'll take your word for it.
Well, so, she was around when Diana was around. They were about the same age, and they ended up getting divorced. And then, Fergie was over here in America doing Weight Watchers commercials and appearances and getting, basically scrounging money in America because she didn't have the royal life anymore, but was trying to keep the lifestyle.
Yeah. Duchess of Pork.
That's right. And that's
what she did that.
Yeah. So she was kind of cringy. in the, I guess, 90s. That would be. She was cringy after her divorce. Well, now that Prince Andrew is like way less cool or way less, I don't know, he's just regarded as a worse person than his gold-digging, cringy ex. Now he's doing appearances with her for the first time since their divorce. Can you believe that? He's using his cringy, gold-digging, yet sympathetic ex-wife to recover his reputation.
Wow. Yeah, that's the guy that was in the Epstein scandal.
Well, that's why he's the guy that gave the interview going, I really liked Epstein. I don't know what the problem is. He was a great guy. He was a good friend. He introduced me to a lot of really great people, so I don't regret a thing.
That was the worst look interview ever. That should go down in history as if like you don't want to do if you're ever going to do an interview to completely destroy your reputation, go ahead and watch that. It couldn't
have been scripted to screw him over more perfectly.
So great.
It was so bad. And it just goes to show how out of touch these people are. So anyway, now we know what's in Meghan and Harry's future. When you're not young and beautiful anymore, everything falls apart and you start
going to pedophile islands and doing
all kinds of weird stuff.
God, that's sick.
That's the Royal Watch update. Prince Charles has recovered.
Where are they living, by the way?
Oh, they've moved to LA. That is the other news. We knew that.
Prediction.
We called that, remember?
Yeah, absolutely.
Totally called that.
They were going to be in Canada.
Yeah, we're going to be in the Commonwealth. We're going to stay in Canada. Whatever. And, Meghan did this voiceover thing for some Disney movie called Elephants, and it's getting really bad reviews, just that it's super cheesy. And I found out that she actually bumped Meryl Streep out of that role. That Meryl Streep was going to do the voiceover for Elephants, but then they got Meghan, and of course, much better. It would have been much better with Meryl Streep, but there you go. So they've moved to LA, and it's just going to be one cringe thing after another from them. So we'll keep following it. It's fun. All right, let's see what's next. Today on today's show, we are going to talk about just our latest opinions on what should be going on with this coronavirus thing from a government standpoint, I guess, and from a personal standpoint. That could change week to week. I think it is changing week to week. We're going to talk about some updates regarding what's being discovered on the ground about this disease. And we're going to talk about, Doug's going to give his expertise on the economy. And then we're going to get into, hopefully, a discussion about why conspiracy theories are awesome and why they are a critical part of being rational, which flies in the face of what everyone else is saying about them. So stay with us to find out why I realize that is a controversial conspiracy theory in and of itself. Mm-hmm. So, but we will get into it. We'll explain I'm saying but that's my opinion. I think it's your opinion, Doug. You've been way more conspiracy theory heavy than me in the past, but...
Well, stay tuned.
Yes,
because I believe in being rational.
Yeah.
That's all I'm going to say.
Well, we'll talk about it. We'll talk about what that means. Okay. So, coronavirus, exploding in New York. But the good news is that it seems like, I don't know why this couldn't happen in other countries. Of course, it has to happen in the United States. Now that we've had an explosion here in the U.S., there's actually some really interesting information coming out about this thing and how to treat it. And it's completely different than all the information that was coming out of Italy and the UK and China about how to treat it, with the exception of the chloroquine, which does seem to be the right treatment. The hydrochloroquine, Z-Pak, zinc combination does appear to work. And so the new theory, though, about what's going on is that this attacks your blood, not your lungs. And in the process of attacking your blood and tossing out the iron, which makes you basically oxygen deprived, and the iron makes your lungs toxic. So it's not really attacking your lungs in the same way that pneumonia does. So it can't be treated like pneumonia. It has to be treated like what they call, I believe, altitude sickness. So when the people that go to Everest, when they don't acclimate and they get oxygen starved, that's what's happening to people. And that's why you're having this massive organ failure. It's all kind of coming together. And the interesting thing about that is, if that's correct, then ventilators are kind of the wrong way to go. And instead, treating with oxygen, maybe blood transfusions, blood thinners seem to be really helping, and some other kind of more focused on the blood rather than the lungs. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, that's fascinating. I have not followed that so closely.
Well,
so
I have followed that closely because I realize that makes me very at risk with my serious anemia. Anemic. Oh my God. Yeah. If I got it, like the first thing I'd do is have to say, give me that big fat blood transfusion right now, because
children's blood.
I can't the blood of high altitude children, please. I would be in serious trouble because I'm already oxygen deprived. So it would be a very bad thing. But at least I feel more confident as this thing. I mean, I hate to say it. You have to have a big explosion in our country in order to learn something. If I have to get it, I'd like to get it on the tail end of this when they really know how to treat it. People like Bill Gates want a mandatory vaccine in a year, and they want us to stay in lockdown until that comes out. And even Fauci, I think, said that. And by the way, Fauci, everybody, this whole thing about experts and authorities, this guy is he's a politician. Mm-hmm. He got his position in a very calm period, right? There wasn't a lot going on. We didn't need a wartime infectious disease guy. And that's what we need now. And this guy is just a politician. He's no good. He's not somebody that we should be listening to. And I really hope that Trump is not listening to him. I think he's a political animal. He's a Democrat. And the thing about the political people is that they're incompetent. They don't think well. They're not creative. They're not going to be able to pull in all this information quickly, make a decision, and come out with their opinion and be confident in that. They're not going to do that, and they're not going to stick their neck out. So that's what we have in Fauci, and it's not helpful, and it doesn't move fast enough. And thank God we have a sort of somewhat private market in health, and we're not dependent on what Fauci thinks for what our healthcare professionals are doing, at least in the main. He's obviously got some influence, and so does the CDC, unfortunately, and the FDA with this. You can't use this drug if it's not qualified to be used for this and that, and the testing and all the stuff where they do get involved, they fuck it up.
Which is why, I mean, this type of person is exactly why you never want central planning.
Exactly. This is the nightmare of a single payer healthcare, government healthcare. Would be a guy like that deciding how COVID would be treated. And it would take him months before he figured out that he would allow the hydrochloroquine, Z-Pak combo to be used. And by then, half the country would be dead. The other thing that he would stall, he would be waiting for the vaccine, because that is the way that you can be very sure and everything's very certain and everything's very organized. But I'd rather find treatments, right? I mean, if I have to get sick and go to the ICU, fine, if they can treat me and I have a very strong chance of survival. I'm okay with that, shit happens. But the scary thing is they don't know how to treat it yet, and a lot of people are dying. So,
well, that's the difference between a marketplace where you're constantly learning new information and applying new information versus a top-down central planner who is using a formula. Not willing to take risks, and not willing to, and a guy whose job is to not think. It's to follow a checklist, and so we can't have that. We need to have as much privatization going forward, and this is such a great opportunity for people like us to be pushing for fewer regulations, for permanently changing the way that we do medicine in this country, which is so Frankenstein monster of government intervention and semi-private and corporatism and fascism and blah. It's such a mess. It is bad, but it is better than full government run. I certainly wouldn't want to be in the UK getting this thing. Yeah.
So anyway.
Well, and keep in mind, remember, the nationalization of testing is partially why we were so slow to react to this. Why it didn't get contained.
I mean, we might have contained it at the border if people could have tested and worn masks, but no, all that stuff. Disease management has been centralized. So, all right.
And the CDC
let's not get into like what happened. What I want to talk about is, what do you think right now we should do? So like, I think you and I both supported a short-term temporary lockdown, which I supported only because they screwed up the containment. So because containment was not achieved and this thing blew up, and I do think that it's something to be taken seriously, and not just because I'm at risk. By the way, I just want to say for the record, Americans should take care of themselves and protect themselves as much as possible and not look to the government to be the answer. That's why we have the Second Amendment. And people go, oh, why do you need guns? Fundamentally, we have a right to protect ourselves and our family the way that we see fit. And that is why we get to have guns. So if a robber comes to my door, I get to protect myself. I don't have to call 911 and rely on the police to protect me. Because they might not get here in time and so on. So I have a right to do what I need to do to keep my family safe. And before this lockdown and before schools were closed, I pulled my daughter out because I'm at risk and I have to take greater precautions. And I saw that this was starting to spread in my community. And so I pulled her out of school the week before. And I was relieved when the schools were closed and everybody then started doing school online, because I was like, how the hell am I going to homeschool my daughter as sick as I am, So I'm relieved that they're involved, even though it's pretty hands-on because she's only 5 for me still. But they've come up with a whole system, and that's great, which they wouldn't have come up with if the schools hadn't closed. However, I was prepared to do what I had to do to protect myself, and that's what everybody should be. That should be everyone's mindset first and foremost, is what do I need to do to protect my family, and do what that is, and quit whining about it and quit telling the government what to do or to protect you. With that said, the government had a role here. Unfortunately, their involvement screwed up containment. Well, then, now we've got this thing spreading, and we have asymptomatic spread, long incubation period, things like that. That made me favor somewhat of a temporary lockdown while they got their shit together. So now it's been a few weeks. Do you feel like they've gotten their shit together? I really don't.
I kind of do. And I don't think they've gotten their shit together. I think that
the testing is not as widespread as it should be. Masks are not as wide. The things that we need to be protecting ourselves out there in the world are still not prevalent. And part of that is because of China. I mean, we're hearing stories of like China coming in here in January and taking, 2 billion masks out of this country.
Well, remember, there's a story that Tucker did with one of the guys that's in control of the logistics of this. And what was happening, too, is that other countries are bidding away the production. I don't know if you heard this is sort of a scandal, but
with 3M?
Foreign country, with 3M, where people were showing up with pallets of cash to buy masks, and they're taking them out of the country. So,
and how unscrupulous can you be, 3M? Oh, okay, we'll just sell to the highest bidder. Fuck America. Well, the country we're in.
And then once again, there's a deeper cause, because why weren't we making the masks here to begin with? Well, mostly because of liability, and it's easier to manufacture offshore because of regulations and liability concerns. So once again, the whole system, the fact that we're producing critical goods and medical supplies as well as pharmaceuticals, not only in a foreign country, but in a country that's like hostile to our own interests and our biggest geopolitical threat, is insane. But what caused that? Well, what caused that was the regulatory state and the liability state. And so when we do a postmortem on this all has to be taken into account. But my point is that we had this monstrous mixed economy system which has helped cause and exacerbate this crisis. And so the fact that we need some sort of government, it's sort of like the immigration thing where you say, well, look, if the government, if people are going to come into the country and then demand public health services and public education and public housing assistance, you have a system that's screwed up to begin with, and that results in a lack of containment, and then a lack of our ability to adapt quickly because we can't produce masks and things like that, then now you need the government to come in and try and fix the problem caused by the screwed up government. And this is how government solutions beget government solutions beget government solutions. So having, and this is one of the things we need to start pushing, we can get into this later, but, is why the free market is the best way to cope with disasters like this, and why we should not be nationalizing our response necessarily. However, in this instance, I agree we needed some sort of government response.
We need some sort of government response. I wish that it was more local, and I think I don't want to get into all the rumors and stuff, but there's rumors that the federal government is buying up masks. I mean, at this point, I feel like it should be hospitals. Why is the government even involved in this? Like except to say, hey, 3M, I do agree with Trump's move, and this is going to, the libertarians out there's heads are going to explode. And objectivists and people that are on the same page with me typically politically, I favor Trump saying, no, you can't 3M, it all comes to America. You're not allowed to sell this to anybody else. You're an American company, your production comes here first. Mm-hmm. I believe in that. That to me is a wartime type of decision that has to be taken in an emergency. However, I don't think that Trump should be buying masks or the federal government should be buying that stuff. I think the hospitals should be buying that stuff. They could maybe run a network where they help people communicate, different hospitals communicate so they can share. I don't know. It just probably you can do that privately too. But, you don't want like Illinois to have 5 billion masks and New York has, 1 million. And so everybody's dying. Like that would be super lame. And but I just don't think people would do that. I mean, maybe that's super naive, but and sometimes with freedom you have to put up with things like that are kind of ugly, bad decisions that people make. But anyway, I did believe in a short-term lockdown. I don't feel like the things that I think needed to be put in place are in place, the testing and the masks, in order to get out of lockdown. But I do think that we could get out of lockdown, like partially. I think that on a county by county basis, that decision should be made. How many people in my county are sick? Like there are counties that have no cases.
Right.
Why aren't those people working and doing whatever they want, going to the store as many times as they want? If you don't have a single case in your county, go outside. I don't understand. You should be out. And this goes to cities versus rural communities. I think if cities are on lockdown, that doesn't mean the whole state should be in lockdown. If New York City is really suffering, that doesn't mean upstate New York needs to be on lockdown. So this really needs to go really local, where possible in terms of the lockdown. And even governors need to take it more local than just state by state. That's what I would like to see. And then you could have really the majority of the country get back to work.
Yeah, I would think that each state should be in control here. The federal government in a wartime situation has some sort of coordination role between the states, and to make things happen quickly. Because let's remember, too, that we don't have a free market. We have a ton of red tape and a ton of regulations as it relates to the sale and procurement of medical supplies, as well as how hospitals operate, with the bed, regulation and all that kind of stuff. So there's a role that the government can play in terms of just getting rid of all that stuff and having executive orders. But it should definitely be controlled on a local level and a county by county level, and let the states deal with this. It's really not a federal thing. And again, that's the danger of a top-down approach. But there are hot spots that probably need to be controlled and have more draconian restrictions in place. And then there are places that really don't have a problem, that's not even, the 10th leading cause of death.
That doesn't mean they won't in the future. So, if you're in Podunk, Minnesota, and you don't have any cases and everybody's working, and then suddenly you've got 10 cases. Okay, everybody, you're on lockdown for a couple weeks.
Yeah, right.
And it can just kind of come and go in waves like this and then that coupled with working on treatments, I think that's what needs to happen. And fuck this vaccine. And Bill Gates going out on every TV show and saying how his companies are working on the vaccine and it's going to come out in 12 to 18 months. And in the meantime, everybody needs to stay home and be controlled. And then you're going to be mandatory vaccinated. And that's going to be a global ID, by the way, where you have a global identification that you've had the vaccination and therefore you can travel.
Yeah, your immunity papers.
Yes. That's Bill Gates' plan for us, everybody. And he's out there and oh my God, the press loves him. And he's it's so creepy. Nobody elected this guy, and he's out there spending his billions and deciding how we're all going to live.
Well, and he's a depopulation, one world.
He is for depopulation because of the environment, everybody. He has said that in a TED Talk. And so that's not a conspiracy theory, although we're going to talk about why that's not necessarily invalid. Here's a conspiracy theory. People think that these vaccines, which are administered with these little tabs that have these little needles, so you put it on your skin, actually. It's like a little bandage with these little pinpricky things that go into your skin. And apparently this will put a invisible dye into your skin that kind of chips you and gives you a skin imprint that you can't see except under certain light, that will give you an international ID. That's what they're saying. And then that will be used. It will be a unique imprint on each tab. So that's the conspiracy theory, is that this is developed and that this is what he wants and he supports this, and him and fucking MasterCard and stuff. So we can talk about how to think about that. But that's certainly, the technology exists to do that. So that's not, and do you think he's evil enough to do that? That's the question, I guess.
Of course. Well, and again, we can go back to, like disentangling this, where you and I, because we're like rational human beings, we care about people and what happens to our society. To the extent that there's a real crisis here, we're worried about it. And then, in terms of like what happens next and what the consequences are of how the government's currently acting and what could happen, to me, that's a separate issue, that you have to disentangle. We know you can have a real crisis and a real virus and also have a corrupt media and corrupt politicians and corrupt philosopher kings like Bill Gates out there trying to use this as an opportunity to seize power and control and further their agenda. So we kind of have to disentangle all this. And this is, to me, where the conversation and the argument is not a soundbite, because a lot of people are conflating these things, saying, well, I'm concerned about the Bill Gateses of the world, and I'm concerned about the Dr. Fauci's and, the Governor Whitmers and the people, the leftists that are going to seize power. And I know that the media is corrupt, and, they're in league with the leftists. And so everything is a lie. Everything that's coming out is untrue. There is no virus, so to me, that's a conflation. There can be a virus, there can be a serious health problem, and there can also be all those other things that we have to worry about. So I think the order of which we worry about these is important.
That all of this is being dealt with in a mixed economy, an extremely mixed economy, in an imperfect situation.
And you have scientific uncertainty, because the nature of science is uncertainty, especially with a complex thing like a virus, where you have a million different factors.
Oh, the models aren't right. Well, it's like, well, okay.
Yeah, right.
But still, like, have you heard how many people died in New York yesterday? I mean, like, that's not fake. 2,000 people died of coronavirus yesterday. It's like, that's not fake. Yesterday that happened, and the doctors' reports out of the hospitals, which aren't fake. I know people on Facebook who are talking about it, and yes, you have to weigh what are the risks of being sick with the whole economy and everything like that, and that needs to be weighed. I just think short-term lockdown, fine. Then we come out, if we're in a community that isn't seeing a lot of cases, then maybe we go back in. In the meantime, we need masks, we need testing, so that we can try to contain it within certain communities. So that needs to happen, and the only way that's going to happen is if the free market takes over there. So I want to move on to 2 other points here before we get into conspiracy theories. Do you remember that I said my master plan for saving the country is that Trump forces California to secede by just annoying them so much?
Yeah, I saw this.
So it's happening. No, I don't know if it's happening. But yeah, my plan is coming together.
Excellent.
Governor Newsom gave like a state, I don't know, he was doing a press conference or something. And then within that press conference, he referred to California as a nation state, as its own nation state, and said that California would be attempting to get the resources that it needed independently with its quote unquote great purchasing power. So it's going to go in direct competition with the federal government on purchasing medical supplies.
Can you tell I'm getting aroused here as you're talking?
No,
about
I can't
California seceding.
Should I?
Yes.
Honestly, we could come out of this with a freer America. Of course, I'm in California, so I'm in the communist part.
You're in the nation state.
Yeah, man. The nation state.
You might have to get over the wall.
It's funny when these people are against nationalism until they're not, right?
Yeah, well, that's one of the great things that come out of this is states' rights. Maybe we'll have a states.
Yeah, I'm for that. And I realize California wants to be really different than America, and so let them.
Yeah.
So honestly, if Trump just pushed a few buttons, that kind of rhetoric would really increase. And you can't say stuff like that and go down that path. To a degree, it will end up being too late to turn back. Like once you've kind of pushed a very lefty populace down that road into outrage and into thinking of themselves as being part of an independent nation here in California. Once you've gotten to a certain point, it's like you're going to tip over the edge and it's going to happen. I think Trump could make that happen within 2-3 months of just being such a dick to them. And that's all it would take is just trolling California a little bit. Anyway, so we'll see if that happens.
It might be a matter of survival where California says, you know what, we have to break off.
That's right.
As an emergency because, the United States is not helping us.
Right.
We got to do what we're going to do. And then,
and maybe that's right. Maybe that's accurate. And if Trump's going to continue to listen to Fauci and Bricks and these questionable characters who are not prepared and I don't know if they're in secret buying up medical supplies, and if they're really doing that, like, I'm sorry, they need to get out. They need to be fired. Surgeon General with his weirdo don't wear a mask, and then I don't know if you saw this,
dork.
But this guy's like, is his IQ 90 or something? I mean, he seems like that. He seems like the guy you went to high school with who like became president of the class but was an idiot or something.
Yeah, totally. Just loved being the president, though.
Yeah, he's like a smiling guy who would clap you on the back but has like no real feelings and no brain. He went on YouTube or on some show or something to show how to make a mask, fold a mask out of just a plain t-shirt, and he used like a t-shirt he had just around the office or whatever, and it said "Got naltrexone," which is like the heroin overdose, or not the heroin.
That's really weird.
Yeah, it's the heroin overdose drug. He just had that laying around. So that's the one he used. What a weirdo. He's just so dumb.
Delightful.
And that's the guy making policy.
Yeah. That's
so, all right. I want to know from you what's going on with the economy. How scary is this? Are we looking at a Great Depression? I mean, it's not just the lockdown. It's the government's response, this $2 trillion stimulus that's basically just an incredible pork bill. I can't even believe that they got away with that. They could only get away with that because everyone was scared out of their mind and distracted at the time. $2 trillion, and only like the tiniest portion of that going to the people who are most impacted by this, like the everyday people who don't have savings more than a month maybe, or the small business owners or whatever. Those are the people hurt the worst, but all that money is going to everywhere else. Anyway, that we don't need to get into that, but my question is, what does this mean, this $2 trillion stimulus, and then now the money printing and the interest rates going to zero, and what's happening?
Well, let's go back a ways, because you got to go back to 2008 a little bit. I mean, this has been in the making for a long time, and I don't think the virus is a catalyst to pricking a bubble, which has been in the making for a decade, where, in the wake of the 2008 crisis, also caused by a bubble caused by the government and the Fed set all sorts of precedents. And remember, we have the Federal Reserve Bank and we have the Treasury. The United States Treasury, this is a totally different entity than the Federal Reserve Bank. The Federal Reserve Bank is what creates money and has the power to create money. And the federal government, when it does something like spend $2 trillion, ordinarily, if you were to go out and try and raise $2 trillion in a bond market, it would force interest rates up. And the Fed has the power to buy government bonds on the open market with fake money. And so this is how the system works. The government issues a bond to fund itself because it has no money and it doesn't raise enough in tax revenue to support itself. So the government's got to go and issue bonds and borrow money. And some of that money does come from the public and from other countries and so on. They buy treasury bonds. But the Federal Reserve can also buy bonds in the open market with counterfeit money, which is how they create their money in the first place. And so what happened during the crisis in 2008, when a lot of banks were going bankrupt, and the Fed came in and started buying a lot of these bonds on the open market, and they do that with counterfeit money, and that increases the money supply. And
when you say counterfeit money, you just mean they printed it.
Yeah, so if
it's not technically counterfeit, right?
It is, because it would sort of be like if I were going to buy your car from you. Let's say you had a car for sale and I came and I said, "Hey, Sonny, I want to buy your car." And, I handed you a suitcase of fake bills. That would be one way to counterfeit. Another way would be to say, "Sonny, look at your bank account. You now have $10,000 in it because I bought your car for $10,000. But let's say that money came from nowhere. I just was able to create an electronic entry that said, "Sonny, you now have $10,000. That's what they do. They just create an entry and say,
"What?" I mean,
that's how our system works.
Who cares whether it's printed or whether it's done electronically? It's the same.
It's the same effect economically, right? So when the Federal Reserve goes into the open market and buys government bonds, they do that with, when I say counterfeit, it's the same thing. They just create the bank that sells it to them gets an entry in their checking account that says the Fed just paid me $1 billion for these bonds, and now there's $1 billion that's been created out of thin air. And so this is this is how they do it. This is how they create money in the system. Banks can also create money, but that would get us into a totally different conversation. But so what's happening right now is, in 2008, there was some limit to the ways in which the Fed was creating money. And at the time, and I posted this on my site, I predicted that at some point the Fed is going to start buying other types of securities other than just treasury bonds. And now, and this actually happened yesterday, they came out with an announcement, and I'm not being hyperbolic when I say yesterday was an enormous event, I think, in the economic and financial history of our country, in that the Fed is essentially willing to buy just about anything on the open market. So not only are they willing to buy treasury bonds, which are still government securities, but they came out and said they're willing to buy municipal bonds, and I'll get into that in a second. Those are bonds issued by states. They're also willing to buy corporate bonds, and they're even willing to buy what are called junk bonds.
So this is the government owning private companies.
Yes, like in a sense directly. It is. Yes, and now they set that precedent in 2008 when they bailed out.
I remember that, and they took shares or something in exchange for a bailout, or
they did. They
took
bought
board seats and.
Yeah, they actually had bailed out, I think, General Motors and.
Yeah, I remember all the uproar at the time, and that was when Obama was in charge, right?
Yeah, so the libertarians and the Tea Party movement was spawned largely from these kinds of bank bailouts, which were going on, where people were saying, well, wait a second, these people took all this risk, and now they're getting bailed out, and we're kind of suffering the consequences of this.
Like, we have to remember this: the $2 trillion to supposedly help the common man, the common American, comes right out of the common American's pocket.
Well, keep in mind, these are two different things. It
literally does in terms of the destruction of his dollar, but also just taxes. So the working man of the country, in exchange for his $1,000 check or something, is going to get robbed blind, and to prop up a stock market that just helps rich people, right?
Well, okay, let's separate two things. One is when the Treasury or the federal government passed a $2 trillion stimulus, and that is different than the Fed. So when the Treasury does that, where does the Treasury get the $2 trillion to then go loan to? Supposedly they're going to loan this money to small businesses, and they're going to send out stimulus checks, to every person is going to get $1,000 or whatever it is. Where does that money come from? Well, they're not going to tax us for the $2 trillion, because that would sort of defeat the purpose. So they have to either borrow that $2 trillion on the open market. Okay, so that the other way they can fund themselves is by borrowing the money. Well, okay, where's that $2 trillion going to come from? Who's going to loan the federal government another $2 trillion? Well, the third way is for the Federal Reserve to buy the government's bonds with counterfeit money, which is essentially, it doesn't happen directly.
It's a tax.
But that's essentially what happens.
And that's essentially a tax, right?
It's an insidious tax.
It's a devaluation of your dollar.
Because remember, when the government taxes us, it's very easy to lay blame. Hey, they raised taxes, I'm going to vote them out. I'm pissed. You
can see the $20 out of every dollar, or the 20 cents out of every dollar. You see it coming out of your check. You see it on April 15th, or when you file your tax return. You can see the amount that you're paying.
Yes. And so they hate taxing people, and in fact, they lowered taxes this year.
And why do they hate taxing people? Because people rebel. That's
people
why.
Rebel,
right?
And people can trace it back to the politician that voted for the tax. So they obviously want to borrow the money. That's much easier for them to do. The problem with borrowing money is if there's a finite money supply, if they keep borrowing and borrowing and borrowing, interest rates are going to go up. At some point, people are going to say, "Hey, I need a higher rate of return if you're going to suck up all the savings of everybody in the world," and so. There comes a point at which as the government continues to issue bonds and issues bonds and issues bonds, there's pressure on interest rates to go up. And they don't want interest rates to go up, because what happens when interest rates go up? Well, not only their costs go up to pay interest, but, mortgage rates go up. It hurts business. It hurts the economy, so to speak, at least according to them. And so they think, well, we don't want interest rates to go up. We don't want to tax people. So now what do? Well, the Federal Reserve comes in, and they can buy the bonds on the open market, which reduces pressure on interest rates. But now the cost is the government has to counterfeit, or the Federal Reserve counterfeits all this money and dumps it into the system. Now no one can track what the hell is going on, but there's still a tax. The tax is inflation. And you see that in a very insidious way. It has a very disproportionate impact across the economy. When you counterfeit money, who gets the money first? And some of that money might sit in a bank account. Some of that money might go to this business or that business, or ends up in asset prices, like people buy stocks. And so stock prices go up. And so there can be a sense that this is actually beneficial and it's causing a boom. And most people look the other way and say, well, that's great. The government spent all this money and it didn't affect me. But it does affect you in a very insidious way. In terms of,
I don't think anyone who shops has not failed to notice in the last 10, 15 years what's happened to prices. I mean, everything. Like I remember in, I don't know, the late 90s, I would take my car to get it washed, at the car wash for $10. And that was pretty standard in multiple cities I lived in. And now you can't really do that without $25. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just little things like that where, oh my God, that's more than doubled.
But keep in mind, there's several ways in which this is insidious. Like you're just saying, like, hey, prices are going up. We all see that, but it can also be the case that prices just don't go down as much. So when you go to buy an iPhone or a car or a refrigerator, what if all those prices were going down? So that you were getting richer because, let's say your income is the same. As people
innovate and things like that.
Yes, and there's more goods and more services and things are getting better. Computers and refrigerators and everything are getting better. Cars are getting better. So all your stuff's getting better and it's getting more plentiful. And so prices really should be going down. And we should all be able to afford 3 cars and 4 houses and 5 TVs and whatever. And in fact, prices are maybe flat or going up even, which is a perversion. The other real perversion, though, and this is what I want to kind of get into here, this is really insidious, and it's hard for most people to understand this. Capital gets misallocated when this happens because interest rates are so low, artificially low. I'll give you an example. Like in the energy industry, for example, because interest rates have been so low, there's been a lot of companies that probably shouldn't be in business able to access cheap credit, and they've gone out and maybe they're drilling for oil in very marginal areas, or they're a company that's not a very good company or very well run, but they're able to get cheap credit. And so capital can go to longer term kinds of enterprises that are essentially wasting capital. That money is going to them under a regime of artificially low interest rates, and they're doing things that wouldn't be done. Maybe that money should be going to drug research or to faster computers or spaceships or whatever the hell.
We don't even know.
We don't even know what's going on. Like this money's just being squandered. I mean, in the housing crisis, remember when doctors were quitting medicine to go flip condos because it was so profitable?
Right.
Like, is there a better illustration of misallocation than doctors quitting medicine to go flip condos? Right. That's the kind of effect you have on society. And it also exacerbates the divide between the rich and the poor because asset holders get wealthier. And what's happened yesterday, and the reason why I said it was such a tremendous event that's not going to get any press, is the government announced that it was the Fed announced that it's going to be willing to buy municipal bonds. Now, in the past, states can't print money, and so they have to be somewhat frugal. They either have to tax their citizens or borrow the money.
Okay. So now they can do whatever because the Fed will just buy their bonds.
The Fed will buy their bonds. So if you're in California and there was some check on California, because they do have to tax people and that pisses people off. Now the Fed could buy California's bonds.
California can do whatever it wants.
Now you've unleashed the federal. It's a free for all.
Good God.
They're also buying corporate bonds. So companies that should be paying higher interest rates because they're riskier and because maybe they're failing, the Fed's going to buy their bonds. They'll distort
that market, and okay, great.
And now you have
they'll own private companies, so they're going to distort that. We're going to have shitty companies propped up by the federal government and controlled by the federal government.
And you end up with a zombie economy, very akin to what Japan has, where you have very static zombie companies that are being bailed out by the Fed that really shouldn't exist, that should go out of business so the capital can be freed up. And so we end up having a lower standard of living because we're not having as much innovation. You've got companies that are nationalized by the government could end up, and you've already seen this.
We already
companies
have
that are getting bailed out.
Yeah.
Are their new rules on these companies, and so we could end up with just a really. And the thing is how do you trace that back and blame one guy?
What's so
and this is why the government does it.
All of this stuff is exactly, and it's complicated. It's too complicated for most people to understand what's happening, and I don't, and it's not reported, and it's difficult to report. And I know from experience too, when I was doing all my videos, whenever I did a video on economics, and my videos were like funny and fun, or tried to be, it was like my worst performing videos.
Yeah, people tune it out.
People tune out economics. It's too complicated. It's too abstract. I don't know. It's like really so.
But it's the most important thing that affects everything you do. Every second is your finances.
What do people need to do today? Like get out of cash?
I would. Well,
you need to be an asset holder. You need to get out of cash.
You need to be an asset holder. You need to buy, to the extent you can, you need to buy physical assets. And, I would be very careful not to hold a lot of fiat currency, a lot of just physical dollars. I mean, we all need them because that's our currency, but they're debasing the currency at a rate that's frightening, and they're promising to do that even more so. And so right now, you can't buy gold. I own gold.
It's really hard to. I've heard that.
There is no gold. Like you literally can't go on a site and try and buy physical gold as a retail investor. You can't buy it. It's out of stock.
Yeah.
And so, you could buy real estate, if
stocks.
No, I wouldn't buy paper. I would buy real property. You could buy property. I'd be very careful right now. I mean, it'll probably benefit the stock market in the short run, what they're doing, because the stock market benefits from credit expansion and from a continuation of the bubble blowing, which is what they're doing.
But it's shaky.
But it's shaky because, you're still in a paper asset. And I'd be very weary of any paper assets right now.
So you need things with intrinsic value.
Real value,
but the thing
like gold,
too, though, even with
silver,
real estate, is like that can be very shaky, and that can be very, as we've learned.
But at least you own a real asset, at least because people have to live somewhere, and so if you're renting houses out, or even if you can afford some land or anything, it won't go down in value. Put it that way. I mean, land is land. And so the problem with holding dollars is they're going to be devalued, and they're already devalued. And again, a lot of it's counterfactual because, I'm telling you what would have happened if they hadn't done this. If the government hadn't done this, all these other great things would have happened. And that's a very hard argument to make. And this is exactly why they do it this way. They're not taxing you, and they're not borrowing the money in the open market because of this process. They can create money and bail people out and not suffer the consequences because no one can track this down. And it's going to destroy our society. And it is destroying our society. Yeah. 2008 was a dress rehearsal, I think, for what's coming. And the virus was a catalyst that pricked this bubble. And, there's a ton of debt.
And this will shake the world. There's like no way to escape this, because when the U.S. goes, everybody's going to suffer. Every country.
Right.
So, right. All right. Let's move on to conspiracy theories, if you don't mind.
Yeah, by the way, that could be a 7-hour conversation. So I'm just trying to get as quick as I can.
That's just very.
Go to my blog if you want.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to deal with all of this at once. We're dealing with this virus, we're dealing with all these problems, and then of course the government response is really, really awful in so many ways, and not just economically, but some of the, I heard Vermont is telling Target they can't carry clothes and other non-essentials. It's like, what does that have to do with the virus? If the store is open, let them sell whatever people are willing to buy. Who gives a shit, Like, what difference does that make? It's just a weird, somebody got a bug up their ass. And I think you were saying last show that the Michigan governor decided that she was going to try to ban the use of that hydrochloroquine.
Yeah,
she was just going to arbitrarily decide. She's not a doctor, but she was going to decide that doctors couldn't use that perfectly safe drug the way that, for coronavirus. So anyway,
right.
That kind of stuff we've got to push back against hard. I don't even know what to do about the economy, because there were voices like Rand Paul, and there's always a scatter of voices of people who try to raise the alarm about this stuff. Even Paul Ryan back in his day, when he was still like a young idealist.
Yeah.
But I don't, what can you do? It's like nobody wants to know about it. Nobody cares about it. It's just like it's just going to happen. So all you can do is try to protect yourself and your family against it. And I don't know, it's kind of coming no matter what. It's happening. And they have so much power, the people who are making these decisions.
Yeah, and that's what's scary about this is it's really hard to disentangle cause and effect here, because we're getting a lot of stuff thrown at you. And when this all happens, disentangling it's very difficult, and then there's this left-right divide ideologically about how we automatically think about this stuff. Yeah. And it's very confusing.
Okay, so let's talk about how to think and why conspiracy theories are a really important part of thinking correctly. I know that's a really controversial thing to say. We've definitely been inundated in the last few years with lots and lots of articles and videos and people talking about how conspiracy theories are terrible. I got to be honest, anytime I hear the word misinformation, I cringe and feel like I'm dealing with someone dishonest. Mm-hmm. I think that word is a piece of shit word that people who are trying to fake what they're saying use. So rather than say lies or even fake news, which to me was invented by leftists to discredit fringe journalism, but was turned against the mainstream media. But that term is even better because at least it's more real about what you're saying. It's made up news. And misinformation is like, if I'm just a citizen journalist and I put something out there and then Twitter decides we've got to crack down on misinformation on the virus, so we're gonna take down anything that goes against the party line, that feels really gross, because misinformation, that sounds like a propaganda term to me. That should be coming from propaganda purveyors, which would be the government or large fascist corporations. So that term creeps me out. And a lot of people, and I'm talking about people on the right, I see this a lot with objectivists. They like to come out and be against conspiracy theories because we're supposed to be pro-objectivity. And I would say, slanted cultural, it's like, it's got a bad rap. Conspiracy theories have a bad rap. It's supposedly anti-reason, and they're not, actually. And I'm going to explain this. But I'm not talking about things for which there's no evidence. I challenge, 1 out of every 100 conspiracy theories has no evidence. It's just something someone made up. That's not really is that a conspiracy theory? That's just weird. That's just like kooky, made up fake news.
Well, don't you think that the concept of conspiracy theory is a false concept to begin with?
I think it's a false concept.
The definition is there are theories. Well, and there are good theories and bad theories. And
I don't know if this is a conspiracy theory, but I've read that term was invented by the government propaganda people to discredit people who were questioning things that they had been involved in. So the CIA and the FBI and stuff back in the 60s.
Well, let's take a quick example. Let me give you this example really quickly, okay? Like if someone, let's say a government, like a politician gets shot and the government comes out and says, oh, it was a lone gunman. But, some video emerges where,
Gee, what could you be referring to with this example?
Well, let's make up an example. But let's say there's eyewitnesses that say they saw 3 shots, and it turns out that there's some grainy footage that shows other people involved, and the guy that took over for this politician has a history of his opponents being murdered and suspicious circumstances. And, to me, this is something where you'd say, okay, I think it's kind of reasonable to investigate this a little bit further. There's all sorts of conflicting eyewitness testimony. So you could have a theory that says, I don't think what the government is saying is true here, and be on solid ground. Now, let's say someone else came out at the very same time and said, I think a pink lizard from Jupiter murdered this politician. Okay, those are 2 separate theories. One is the pink lizard theory is by its nature is not rational. There's no evidence. There's no evidence for it. It's not something you could point to as being realistic. Yeah. Whereas the other thing, there is real evidence for. So now the government propagandist comes out and says these are all conspiracy theories.
So they are able to discredit the legitimate ones by labeling anything that's a theory that hasn't been definitively proved yet as fake. As totally fake. And so that is what I'm seeing. I don't know about you, but that is what I am seeing in the world today. When people come out against conspiracy theories, they are lumping together both of those things, and they are actually preventing people from thinking in that initial stage of coming up with a hypothesis or a theory where you're saying, oh, I see a couple weird, hey, that's not questioning authority, questioning experts, seeing something in reality that makes you question what you thought you knew or what you're being told. That is not allowed. If you do that, you are called a kook and a conspiracy theorist, and that's super dangerous. That is leading us into a place where we are expert worshipers, where we just we only believe what we're told to believe. You're not allowed to think outside the box. And it's like, the world of, I don't know what you'd call it. It's very un-American, un-American way of going about thinking.
It's creating a class of knowledge called conspiracy theory, which is automatically invalidated by the mere fact that a conspiracy has been asserted. And so how many times do you hear someone say, I'm not a conspiracy theorist? Well, it's a false class of knowledge. There's theories, and some involve people that conspire or had foreknowledge. But the point is that there's good theories that have evidence, and there's bad theories. And to tarnish anyone who has an alternative explanation of an event is to be completely non-objective. And so those people get tarnished and get broad brushed out, where you say, well, that guy's just a conspiracy theorist. Super dangerous, because now we can't question authority, and anyone that does question authority is automatically, like you just said, labeled a kook. And so
it makes me want to throw up when I see objectivists saying this. They're basically saying, don't question authority, don't think for yourself, don't look at evidence and integrate new facts. Don't do that. That's a conspiracy theory. That's epistemologically unsound. That's anti-reason, they say.
Right.
Alex Jones should be shut down. He's no good. He's a total kook. Well, Alex Jones may have some bad theories, and he's an entertainer. I think of him as an entertainer. But if people, and this is what I want to talk, so before all of this coronavirus stuff, you'd often see this in politics. You'd see conspiracy theories like the Sandy Hook thing with Alex Jones and whatever, which actually, I'm not even sure that even happened. He denies that he even said something. I don't know. I haven't looked into it. But the thing is, when you have a mainstream media that is so corrupt like we do today, I personally rely on the more questionable news sources quite a bit. And it's not that I'm not capable of watching Alex Jones with a grain of salt and saying, well, okay, that's interesting, but I don't know. I mean, I have to get more information but he has actually broken a number of stories that turned out to be true. And if you don't allow for this kind of fringe media that's willing to say things that may or may not be true and put forth some bad theories and some good theories and like just wild theories, if you don't have that part of the marketplace of ideas happening, you're not going to have truth ever. You're only going to have approved stories, and you're not even allowed to get to new approved stories because that would require that you started back at the beginning with a theory. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. I mean,
and we're seeing that with the coronavirus big time. But what's great about, I mean, I guess what's great about the coronavirus, what's great about how fast moving this thing is that we're seeing things break out as theories. These crazy kooky theories. You have this weirdo Hasidic Jew doctor put out this YouTube video calling to Trump and saying, I've been treating my patients and none of them are going into serious condition, and it's this cocktail of drugs, and you see people immediately call him a kook, brand it, unproven, anecdotal, not science, no study, not true. He's not, this hasn't been done in a lab. It's fake news. Misinformation. Take it down. Shut it off of Twitter. Shut it off of Google. That's what was going on to this guy. Well, things moved way too fast, and people started studying his theory and started using those medications because people were dying. So why not try anything? Mm-hmm. And it turns out he's telling the truth.
Well, and okay, so, you're bringing out another great point, and it gets into the FDA as well, which is this is how knowledge actually works. And what you're saying is the coronavirus, because it's such a nightmare for most people, we're willing to quickly move and quickly ascertain these things and not just dismiss them because we all want a cure. And so, but this is really how inductive thinking works.
Exactly.
You're constantly looking for new information and new facts to increase your knowledge. And this is what good science is. It's not, I have a formula.
Honestly,
and my
to me,
formula,
it's like when I hear people bash conspiracy theories, I feel like they're bashing science at the most basic level, where you just are starting, you just have a hypothesis based on a couple of things you see, and you want to try something and whatever, and you're putting out and maybe you're wrong, maybe you end up where it's not right. But that's how you start with science. And this attack that is science. You don't get anywhere without that.
Science is often proving things wrong and contradicting. That's how science works. You have a hypothesis, you do an experiment, you get new information, and if it contradicts, then you have to move on and come up with a different theory. But you're constantly open to new information and new observations, which can condition your own thinking. This is how science works. This is how great science works. And this is what we're seeing in real time with Corona is, guy has a model. Well, your model's way off, dude. It's not even close. Oh, okay, well, I assume this, I assume that. Okay, well, that's why it's wrong. Your assumptions were all wrong. Okay, well, this model's really accurate. It's really seems to work. Well, why is it? Well, it made this assumption that, okay, great. Well, let's go with that. Well, okay, now it's wrong. Well, what happened? Well, this happened. This new, this is constantly how science and this is how knowledge works. This is how human beings learn new things. And, when you're dealing with something, particularly government or events which occur, assassinations or things that involve politicians or, where people have definitely have a motivation to cover up or suppress or lie in some way, which usually they do. Why wouldn't you be skeptical of everything you hear? Why wouldn't you want to check what's being said? And if you see contradictions, say, wait a second, this, 7 people said this, but the government's saying that. Why don't we follow up? No, you're a conspiracy theorist. As if the government comes out with an official narrative, somehow that's magically true. That attains the status of truth because a government official said it. And now anyone that questions that is kooky or crazy. That's a total inversion of rational epistemology.
Exactly.
Proof.
Yeah.
You believe things because it's true and there's proof, not because a government official told you to believe it.
And this idea that anecdotes in science or in medicine in particular, oh, that's just anecdotal. That's just some doctor seeing it in his practice. As if that's not a valid piece of evidence.
Exactly. That is evidence. Why is it that occurred?
Why are my 400 patients, half of them elderly, not getting critical? Why are they all healthy? Gee, that's a fact of reality. That's a piece of evidence that this doctor realized.
One of the reasons I said the thing about the FDA was because of what you just said, which is the way the FDA, because it's a centralized authority, demands that science be done in a certain way, where you have to do these clinical trials, and then it has to have like total safety, can't hurt anybody, and it's got to work on an aggregate. So instead of looking at a drug and how it might affect a smaller population, where you say, well, this drug, it works this way for young people, but for elderly people or for women or whatever, it works this way. And hey, we've got like 10% of people get this, so we got to go treat that. Why are they getting that? And this doctor said, cause and effect is very complicated. There's not a universal, but because of the way the FDA works, we look for universals, and we want an aggregate study, a double-blind study that, proves that an aggregate does this. Well, that's not really scientific. It's partially scientific, but it's forgetting that there might be different causes and effects that operate biologically in different populations. So, you might have the HCQ drug with Z-Pak, that might work if, maybe early on in the cycle it works on people, but if you're critical, it no longer works. Well, and it may work on younger people who are already healthy, or whatever. It could work in all sorts of different ways, and there might be other treatments that work in different ways. And so that's how science works. You don't just say, no, the FDA has not approved this with a 5-year study on apes and, a double blind, and therefore it's all misinformation. And anyone that says anything or posts a video,
should
be shut down and suppressed.
Right.
Don't even talk about it.
If a doctor prescribes it, he should lose his license, and just on and on and on. And it's just, it's really it's anti-rational reason. It's anti-inductive reasoning in science, and it's all bundled up in this conspiracy theory or attack on anecdotes being a valid piece of evidence. And when I went and got my coronavirus test, the doctor, and by the way, like I'm just a news junkie who's sick, so I have a lot of freaking time to sit and read news. That's my status. This is a doctor that I'm seeing here who's giving me this test. And I'm at urgent care, and I get the coronavirus test. And I say to her, she says, blah, blah, you're going to know in a few days. I said, okay, so if it turns out to be positive, I'm really at risk. Would you prescribe me the hydrochloroquine Z-Pak zinc thing? And she did her intimidating doctor thing where they stare you down, and she said, oh, that's not science. She literally said that to me.
Whoa.
That's not science. There's no proof that works. So no, we're not doing that. And,
Whoa.
I'm like, what would it take for you to have proof that it works? 5 years? 5 years of trying it. And in the meantime, I'm dead. So fuck you. I mean, it's not even an unsafe drug.
Right.
So for her to be so dismissive, and she did the whole, please trust me, I've seen so many doctors. I know this don't question me sort of stance that they sometimes get.
Yeah.
The bad ones, I should say. and then I was talking to my GP later. I can't remember if I was talking to her on the phone. I think I was. And we were discussing it. And she said that she had received a letter from the state of California reminding her that it was not, or it was like the medical organization in the state of California reminding her that it was not proven, that it was not, like going through this whole thing about why doctors should not be prescribing this. A scolding letter to doctors about this chloroquine.
Which is a veiled threat too.
Oh, absolutely. And so she told me about that. So obviously that urgent care doctor had received that as well. And part of it's political, part of it's just because it's it's something Trump mentioned, I guess, and so we have to be against it. But I don't even think it's about Trump, because I've seen that over and over and over in the years that I've been sick in just how doctors think. And there's some doctors who are still thinking, and most doctors are not thinking. They're going through their checklist. They're following the FDA recommendations and protocols to the letter. They don't ever go outside the rules or think outside the box. Mm-hmm. And those doctors are terrible doctors. They're for people like me. They're fine if you have something that's easy to test, easy to cure, part of the checklist. Like they're great.
A database. They're a database.
They are. They could be a robot. They literally could be a robot.
They're like WebMD.
You could program them. You could program them to do their job. Even their clinical experience, you could program that in. Mm-hmm. They're almost worthless. And when you find a doctor who's still thinking and still able to regard anecdotal evidence as real, who's paying attention in their clinical practices, who's reading up on what's happening on the fringes of medicine, and who's willing to entertain, quote unquote, kooky conspiracy theory medicine, which it isn't. It's just beginning medicine. It's early medicine. It's, it's
a hypothesis.
Yes. The people paying attention to that and thinking, and well, why would that work? And why wouldn't it work? And putting it through their own base of knowledge. Those doctors are worth every cent. I mean, they're just...
That's why research hospitals are typically way better if you have a complicated condition.
Right.
Because those are the kind of people that are actually thinking and doing research and willing to entertain complexity. Whereas the database doctor, he's a WebMD. You might as well just go to WebMD and program your symptoms in.
Right.
And have it spit it out.
And it's funny because those doctors who are really good, I don't even think that they realize how different they are. And one character trait or personality trait that they have or don't have, they don't get defensive with you.
Yeah.
They don't give you that condescension. They regard themselves as people just like you. They often like it when you call them by their first names. They're just more down to earth, and they're doctors you can have a conversation with as equals. And when you are in that atmosphere with your doctor, you generally with a good doctor. But the second you say, well, what about this? And they just poo-poo you, it's over.
But that plays into the leftist central planning ideology versus the right too, in that, the leftist central planner, the person who says the science is over, and who accepts the Green New Deal and climate alarmism and who just regards anyone who questions their scientific authority as rubes to be controlled. This is exactly, the divide ideologically, which is, the leftist central planner doesn't want to be questioned. How dare you question my authority? They love the power. They don't want anyone. They don't want to have to answer any questions because they don't really have an answer. They just want to be respected and revered as an authority. And then they're the ones who are willing to say things like, the science is over. We've settled this matter. The consensus is X. Whereas the inductive person who revels in a marketplace of ideas where there's constantly new information and new ideas and new research being done, who can then weigh risk reward and say, well, there's a risk to doing this, but here's the benefit to doing it too. That's the American, that's like we'll call it libertarian, the rational, the person who's seeking to be objective and seeking truth and who's comfortable being free and open and wants a marketplace of ideas because they realize that's the path to innovation and learning new things.
It's the path to truth. It's the path to understanding.
It's the path to happiness.
The people who are putting down conspiracy theories, I don't, I'm sure some people are just wrong and they're just kind of parroting what they've heard. I think a lot of objectivists think they're wrong because the way that they've been packaged together, what they think we're talking about is the pink lizards did it theories, but that's not what we're talking about. I believe that those are very far and few between. Even the kooky, way fringe theories that turn out to be bad or whatever tend to be based on some truth. It's just the wrong explanation for it. So the really crazy stuff is just really rare. And as somebody, like back in January, when on this show we were saying, oh God, this thing is coming. This virus is coming. It's going to be here. We need to take precautions. We need to be ready for this. Buy toilet paper. That was considered conspiracy theory in January.
Yeah.
And to me,
go look at all the tweets.
It was as plain as the nose on my face that this thing was coming and that it was serious and that it was going to be bad for me personally. I knew that by January 20th or something like that. And that was, so why do I know that? Because I'm open to fringe news. I believe that that's it. Like I don't watch Alex Jones, but I will watch Alex Jones. I'm not averse to it if it's interesting. If there's
I don't think fringe news is even the right characterization. You were watching videos of like emergency rooms in China.
That's right. But that's
dying.
Fringe news. That's citizen journalism. That's
right.
Chris Martinson's YouTube channel, as well as this epidemiologist in the UK who was doing daily videos just out in his living room. That's fringe news. That is not NBC, CBS, BBC. And I'm willing to listen to those people. I'm confident in my ability to. I don't jump to conclusions. I'm also okay being wrong. So if I have to change my mind a few days later, that I'm comfortable with that. So I think that's part of it. Like I don't have to have an opinion right away. And that's another thing I've noticed. It's like when this whole thing went down and I was like taking this virus quite seriously, and then there's this whole faction on the right that was saying it's a hoax, and I was not willing to say it was a hoax. They glommed onto that opinion. Oh, I must be for a prolonged shutdown of the economy. It's like,
right. No.
I never said that. And actually, for a long time, I didn't really have an opinion because I didn't know what the right course of action was, given the facts of reality. I didn't know what to do. And I wasn't willing to say one way or the other because I didn't know. But because I wasn't willing to say, I got assigned an opinion based on an opinion I did have. And that was unrelated. So it was just it's just a messed up thing, you guys. And part of it has to do with the way that I would say you got to work to be rational is you have to be open to fringe news because that's where all the news is. I don't even watch CBS, NBC, BBC. There is no news there. There is no news on the mainstream
so sterilized,
channels.
It's unbelievable.
All the news is outside of there. So that's number one. And you have to entertain the new theories. This new theory about the hemoglobin is really interesting. That may turn out to be totally fake. It may not be real, but it seems to be pointing in that direction, and it's fascinating, and we should be paying attention to it. And I hope people run with that and try to work with that and see if that works, because that could be the cure. That could lead to treatments that make it really difficult to die from this thing.
Well, it sounds like misinformation that needs to be suppressed and shut down to me.
Well, that's what Fauci would say, or Gates. They want a vaccine. I don't want a vaccine. I got to tell you, I already feel there are some vaccines that I think are good and some vaccines I think are bad, which apparently makes me an anti-vaxxer by conspiracy theory hater standards.
All vaccines.
All vaccines are good. All vaccines are good, or you are a conspiracy theorist. This vaccine that they rush through human trials and stuff, no fucking way am I taking that. And as somebody with a compromised immune system, I understand how little is known about the immune system.
Right.
No way am I injecting myself with that, whatever that is. I'm not doing it.
And once again, this is a great example, Sonny, because you're in a special population of people that have immune compromised. The FDA did a study, and in aggregate, the vaccine works. It works on 18% of the, well, yeah, but you're in a special case. What is your particular condition, and how could the things that make us uncertain about this vaccine play out in a system where, you're autoimmune compromised? Like, that's a serious factor. But most doctors, because the FDA approved it in aggregate, oh, you're fine. Go ahead and take it.
And by the way, they have never developed a vaccine for a virus like this. There is no vaccine for this type of virus, the kind that they're talking about. So they don't know how this works in humans. And they
the SARS
in the past,
version of
the ones that they've been working on for SARS and MERS, they've caused cytokine storms in monkeys. So where they cause total organ failure because they make the immune system overreact. Ultimately, they overreact the immune system. So as somebody with an overactive immune system, no way am I taking this vaccine. If they mandate it, I will find a way to, I don't know, forge a certificate, like buy a forgery or something. I would never take this vaccine. It would probably really hurt me.
Yeah, and that's your choice too, and you have good reason to think that.
Yeah,
and it's your choice.
If I were healthy, I wouldn't, like, based on what I know about all this, I wouldn't take it. It's not going to be a good thing. We are much better off to be focusing on treatment of this virus and just, flattening the curve and just slowing it down with masks and testing and things like that, and containment as much as possible, because I don't think the vaccine is the right, and it's so far out. So we are better off if we can find treatment and figure this thing out and really understand this virus in the next couple of months. I think American doctors are on their way to doing that because it's exciting. I mean, the fact that it's here for a month, basically, and I saw a doctor say that she had seen something change in the last couple of days in the hospitals where it didn't feel like death was just imminent. That the treatments that had been figured out and the systems that were now in place were saving the lives, and that people were getting healthier and leaving the hospital.
Well, you're seeing the curve flatten in the United States too, which is a really good sign.
Not the curve. She means of the people admitted, there wasn't this sense of doom anymore.
No, I mean, in addition to what you're saying,
and in
it's
addition
also
to that, cases have gone down.
So I think we're close.
Yeah.
So, I think what we have to do to get back is, if the curve's flattening and we're seeing this in the hospitals, I think certain locations need to just immediately rescind these orders. And then I'd probably be in favor. I'm not as averse to requiring the masks for a while, at least for a few weeks, where people are up in arms about like, first of all, if you can't get a mask, I totally understand that, but you can also make them out of cloth and stuff like that.
Everybody can cover their mouth with something. There's just no excuse.
It's for a few weeks, and so if you do that,
it's
and
better
you're pretty
to
serious
have
about it, great.
Law than the lockdown. I mean, I'd rather be out there wearing a mandatory mask than being locked in my house, if that's what it takes. And we do need to protect the vulnerable. We do. There's a lot of people dying we're talking about. And I mean, I'm vulnerable, so it's probably easy for me to say that, but people talk about how it's, why don't we just isolate the sick and vulnerable? But because you can't. Like, I rely on people for my life. I can't be isolated. I just wouldn't survive being isolated. So
well, it's also the case, though, they're talking about, you can't just mark everyone as you're safe and you're not.
Right. We don't even really
obvious.
know who gets it seriously and who doesn't. We don't know enough about the disease.
And I even read an article about like how the disease is spontaneously reemerging in people that had it, that have antibodies to it. Jesus. So you can't just tell me that we absolutely know.
Yeah, there's something about maybe viral loads playing, like how you first get it, what your initial viral load exposure was, something about that. But
at the same time, and I'm going to say this like for not devil's advocate, I think it's rational, which is there's always a risk. There's a risk to walking across the street that you're going to get hit by a car. We can't have the Dr. Fauci, like no cases, no risk.
That's not possible.
There's risk reward to any sort of like contagion everywhere, whether it's flu or anything else. And so we can't be sitting here saying zero risk. That's idiotic. There just has to be a point where
it's not possible to get to zero cases. It's just not going to happen. Containment is over. So it's management.
And there's a risk to being locked down, which is the economy and people's lives and everything else. So, like what can we do right now? Probably let a lot of people go where there's not a lot of cases and just wear masks. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And have prudent social distancing. Mm-hmm. And then if shit hits the fan again, well, maybe we got to lock down for a couple weeks in an area, whatever. But, so to me, there's like competing things here. There's the people that say, absolutely no risk, never do anything. The government has no role. And then there's the central planner who's saying, we need zero risk until our vaccine is done, and we give everyone an immunity paper. That's outrageous and stupid.
Yeah. Okay. So, but we did change the subject. I wanted to just circle back and close the conspiracy theory thing. Yeah. So, I guess you guys get my point. I think conspiracy theories are a critical part of thinking. It's a critical part of reasoning and science. And every objectivist it's a favorite little thing to bash for objectivists. And as somebody who, is, I guess, in that segment of the population, I think it's wrong. I think it's a mistake. It's not scientific. It's not pro-reason. And so, yeah, that's what I have to say about that. You have any closing remarks on that? And I think
there are theories. Some are good and some are bad. Theories that have evidence should be investigated. Theories that are bad and have no evidence should not be investigated. And particularly in a case where we all know the government, particularly in our mixed economy, where the government has motives and agendas, and there is suppression of information, and the media is corrupt and biased, it's essential to explore alternative explanations where there's reason and evidence and motivations. And to do otherwise is to abandon reason, and it's very dangerous. And it's even worse to criticize others who do have good reason for their views without hearing them, by just dismissing them as conspiracy theorists, as if that's some automatic invalidation because they're proposing an alternative. That's dangerous to our society, and it's not objective.
And you can see that it is that attitude, which is prevalent, has created an environment where experts are worshipped, and a lot of these experts are really just entertainers. I mean, when it comes to people who do a good job on TV.
As if science is revealed. Yeah. Science is not revealed like religion, where the experts have spoken.
Meanwhile, you have this curmudgeon-y, weird, bearded dude on YouTube saying, I'm curing all my patients. He's not the most photogenic, expert out there, and easy to dismiss because he looks weird. Anyway. All right. Well, that is it for our show today. We went long on purpose because we know you're home doing nothing. So we figured you guys can take another half hour of our show today. And I guess next week, I don't know. We keep talking about coronavirus. We can't ignore it. We can't avoid it. We'll try not to have the same show every week where we don't talk about something new. And if you guys have any ideas for things you'd like us to talk about besides that, we'll do that. And of course, we'll continue to keep you updated on the royal family. So that's it for this week. See you next week.
There is a house called the House of Sunny. It's filled with satire and fun. It's been the demise of bad ideas, and we'll know what's right when she's done. Perspectives you may lack. It's concise and right and achieves world peace. Guaranteed all your money back. Last time, ready?